Hey, Andrew Pudawa here. Good to have a chance to talk to you, even though we can't be at an actual convention this year. It's good to connect however we can. I was asked to speak today for a few minutes on the subject of motivation. I have been a student of motivation my entire adult life. When I first began teaching as a violin teacher, I experienced the fact that one of the biggest parts of my job was to help parents inspire, encourage, accomplish the goal of having children practice violin every day, consistently, day after day, month after month. So, as I moved into other areas of teaching, my own children and some other people's children as well, I started to understand a few things about motivation. So, today I will share with you the 4 forms of relevancy and the 3 laws of motivation. I kind of came up with this construct. There may be some additional ideas that could be added in, but we're going to try and limit the scope here to what we can do in a short session. So think about it. When you are trying to teach or maybe learn something, if that thing that you are trying to teach or learn is meaningful, interesting, useful, applicable, relevant in some way, it is easier to teach and learn. Would you not agree? If something is not meaningful, interesting, applicable, useful, relevant in some way, it's harder to teach and learn. Wouldn't you agree? And so I've come to see that there, I think, are 4 forms of relevancy. At least the idea can be divided into 4 areas. The first and highest form of relevancy would be intrinsic. Intrinsic relevancy. This is when something is interesting to a person for no apparent reason. It just is. Maybe it's part of their soul. Maybe it's just there for environmental reasons. You're not sure, but it's just kind of obvious. This person is interested. In my case, for example, my mother said that I was begging for a violin from the time I could talk. Why? She was a piano and voice teacher. This violin thing seemed a little bit random, but as I look back over the trajectory of my life, it's very, very clear. Had I not grown up playing the violin, nothing would have been the same. I never would have, say, gone to Japan to study with Suzuki. I never would have gone to Philadelphia to work at the institutes with brain-injured children and their families. I never would have taken the position I took. I never would have walked the path I walked. Probably IEW itself would not exist today if my parents had not, I guess you could say, catered to, or I might say capitalized on, that interest I had, that strong desire at a young age to play the violin. I'll give you another example, something a little more universal. Do any of you know a boy between the ages of, say, 9 and 12 who is not interested in knives, swords, or weaponry of some sort? I have asked this question to many, many, many thousands of people, and I will say I think it's probably 1 or 2 out of 1,000 who will say, yeah, I have a 10-year-old boy, he couldn't care less. But I think we're in the high 99.9 something percent of boys are intrinsically interested in knives, swords, or weaponry of some sort. Why is this? Well, we don't really know. We don't raise them up to be that way, but they start to show that interest oftentimes at a younger age. So what does this mean, this idea of discovering intrinsic relevancies? We want to capitalize on this because it is the highest and best form of motivation. When you are internally driven to learn something, you will learn it more easily. In homeschooling, we have so many choices. It's wonderful. It's a freedom, and you can't really teach everything to everybody, but you can teach some things to some people. And let's say you have a choice. You could choose between, you want to do something and call it science. You say, okay, we could choose between edible plants of North America or medieval weaponry? Should be a no-brainer. Now, some people might say, well, you should always choose edible plants of North America because, if you were lost hiking in the Appalachians and you saw something and knew whether it was safe to eat or not, that knowledge could save your life, therefore it's more useful, therefore you should choose that. I dispute your premise. I dispute your premise. No one knows when how to make a catapult might not come in very useful. So, capitalize on intrinsic relevancies. The second form of relevancy, which is almost as good as intrinsic, is inspired. Now, not everybody is interested in everything, but some people are very interested in something. And if you can hang out with someone who's very interested in that, you often become interested in it as well. This is so true for children. They are so often inspired by peers or other adults or parents. I, for example, had a 13-year-old girl who was absolutely fascinated to study the differences between capitalism, communism, socialism, and the idea of distributism as an alternative between rabid capitalism and oppressive communism. And so she was reading all this stuff. She even read the Communist Manifesto herself at that age. Now, why? It wasn't something I pushed on her. It was something that I personally was very interested in, and I was reading all this stuff from Chesterton and Belloc about distributism, and it was very exciting, and she kind of got excited when we started reading together and talking. I'll give you another couple more examples, one real and one hypothetical. Hypothetical example, you say to your son, "Hey Billy, would you like to collect stamps?" Billy says, "No, not really." You say, "Okay, well, you don't have to, it's just an idea." Billy goes to Johnny's house. He comes home. He says, "Mom, can I collect stamps?" "I thought you didn't want to collect stamps." "Yeah, but Johnny has this awesome stamp collection. He's got stamps from 72 different countries, and he's got these envelope things that are really cool with a lot of cool spaceships and stuff. And he's got one stamp. It's worth $10, and it's in this big book, and it's really organized. It's just cool." Well, what happened there? He wasn't interested because he didn't have any exposure. He didn't have enough knowledge or inspiration from anybody, but he goes to his friend's house, whom he loves or respects to some degree, and his friend's enthusiasm is contagious. Here's a real-life example of inspired relevancy. I came into my home one day, and there were 4 teenage girls, all between the ages of, say, 15 and 17, eating my chips and my guacamole, standing around the island in the kitchen of the house, having a heated discussion on whether admitting Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia into the NATO alliance would alienate Russia and thereby degrade Russian-American relations. Now that's weird. Why would 4 teenage girls, in their spare time, be talking about such an obscure idea of global politics and international policy? Well, it just so happened they were all on the debate team, and that year the resolution was that NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, should be significantly reformed or abolished, and one of the plans was to admit the Baltics. And so in their spare time, they were bouncing the ideas, kind of mentally testing out, their knowledge of the situation. They were inspired to learn almost completely irrelevant information because of the positive peer interaction and the desire to do well. So, what does this mean for us in the homeschool? Well, I'll tell you in my case what it means is I should probably not teach science to my children. Why? I don't like science. I wish there was less science. In fact, my worst memory of school were classes like biology. And I dropped out of physics. Why? It's boring, awful stuff. Now, if I were to teach science to my children, the attitude I would pass on to them is, this is really a stupid waste of time, so let's just hurry up and get it done so we can be done with it and go read a good book. Is that the attitude I want them to have? No. So what can I do? Well, I've never been into big co-ops or communities or organized things, but I do like to broker deals. So, you've got friends, they're homeschooling. Oh, you're a nurse. Wow, if you're a nurse, that means you must have taken biology and chemistry and stuff like that. So, tell you what, you take my teenagers and teach them some science for a couple of years, and I'll take your kids and we'll do writing and logic and rhetoric for a couple of years and maybe some Shakespeare. Deal? Deal. So, if I teach what I know and love best, and I find other people to teach my children what they know and love best, then my children will get the best of both worlds. And I think we can all look back into our youth and say, okay, what subject in school did we like? And almost all the time, those subjects we liked are attached with teachers that we respected or that were inspiring to us to some degree. So, inspired relevancy. Third form, not quite as effective, but still above the waterline, and that would be contrived relevancy. See, there's some things you have to learn that just aren't really interesting to anyone. They're kind of mechanical. You just have to know them. It could be things like math facts. It could be geography. It could be some grammar stuff. And nobody's excited. It's not interesting. You don't get inspired, but you can be inspired to pay attention and try to learn it if it becomes a game. So you contrive relevancy by creating a game. And if you go watch any of these teacher hero movies, and there's, a dozen or more out there, there's always a scene somewhere in the teacher hero movie of this teacher creating a game. And the students are so engaged and they really look like they're learning. And sometimes it's a very small shift from a chore to a challenge. Give you an example. You might find out there a language arts workbook or something that has a paragraph, and then it has the instructions. Identify all the prepositional phrases in this paragraph, underline the prepositional phrase with a single underline and the preposition itself with a double underline. And you look and there's, a dozen sentences and you're just like, bleh. Totally awful thing to have to do. Why? What's the point? But you have to do it. It's a chore. Okay, here's a small shift. Here's a paragraph. Hidden inside this paragraph are 12 prepositional phrases. Find them all, and you win. That's a completely different activity. I am a boy. I couldn't care less about prepositional phrases, but I like to win. And if you can set up a game so that I can win it, I'll play your stupid game, and maybe I'll learn something about grammar in the process. So I have noticed there are many ways that you can construct games for children. We have some resources. We actually did a webinar not long ago on teaching with games that might be of interest, and definitely a theme to build on, and of course lots of great resources out there, whether it's card games like Rummy Roots or Outmatched, which we sell, which is History Fact. Games can totally inspire children to learn things that otherwise wouldn't be terribly relevant. Now, the fourth form of relevancy is the least effective, and unfortunately, it is likely to become a default mode if we're not careful, and that would be enforced relevancy. Enforced relevancy is essentially where you say, learn this or suffer some penalty. And okay, so a kid is, looking at this and they think, well, fine, I'm going to suffer if I do. I'm going to suffer if I don't. I might as well just go eat worms and die. And it's very easy to fall into kind of a hate of learning when the only options are unpleasant ones. Now, I would be the first to admit this is easier to say you can avoid than to actually avoid, and I have, of course, been as guilty as anyone of saying, I'm sorry, you're going to do that math, or you're going to never eat dinner, ever, until it's done, out of frustration. But I think we have to be very careful because this type of motivation seems to be the least effective in that it gives a temporary appearance of learning, but there's nothing that's going to be more long-lasting. And it is kind of a default mode just because of our own experience. I think about For me, the stereotypical one is biology in high school. And so you have to take biology. Why? Well, if you don't take biology, you can't graduate. Okay, fine. Now you have to study and get good grades on the biology quizzes and tests. Why? Because if you don't, you'll get a bad grade in the class, and that'll lower your GPA. And if your GPA is low, you won't get into a good college or university. In fact, if your GPA is too low, you might not even get into college at all, which means the best you're ever going to do is assistant manager at Denny's, living a life of poverty and misery. And that's why you take biology. Okay, that's, maybe a little bit hyperbole, but I think you get the point. So, you can go through the motions of holding the information in your brain just long enough to pass the quiz, pass the test, and as soon as that class is over and you got the grade on the transcript, poof, it can all go away because there was no real relevancy. It was enforced, therefore ineffective. So those are the 4 forms of relevancy. Moving on, we'll talk about the 3 laws of motivation. And these are kind of one law and a couple corollaries. So the first law of motivation is this: children like to do what they can do. Children like to do what they can do. This is actually true for all of us, isn't it? Don't we like to do what we're good at? If we think we cook well, we like cooking. I think I cook well, and so I like cooking. I don't know if I do, but I think I do. I like going to conventions and speaking to large groups of people. In fact, the bigger the group, the better. Why? Because I think I'm good at it. I don't know if I'm good at it, but I have enough evidence to support the idea that I can think I'm good at it. Therefore, I like doing it. There are parts of my job that I like doing because I think I'm good, and there are parts of my job I don't like as well because I'm not as good at that. And children are just like this. In fact, that's the first thing they'll say once they can start talking is, look at me, look at what I can do. My granddaughter, at about 3.5 years old, liked to jump from the couch to the coffee table and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth any number of times. And if I wasn't watching her continuously, if I looked away for even a second, she would say, Grandpa, watch. Why? What was it about this? Well, she could do it. And so she wanted to show that she could do it. She liked it, right? So that's the first rule. Children like to do what they can do. The second rule is a corollary here. Children want to do what they think they can do. Actually, I think this is true for all of us, isn't it? Don't we kind of have a desire to do something we think we would be successful at? I, for example, would like to speak in a huge coliseum to 30,000 people for an hour or more. Now, a lot of you would not want to do that. For a lot of you, standing in front of 100 people and talking for half an hour would not appeal. But for me, that would be far too short of a time and too few people. I want a coliseum full of people because I think I could. Haven't done it yet, but I think I could. My son, when he was about 10 years old, wanted to jump off the roof of the house. Why? He thought he could. I had no desire whatsoever to jump off the roof of the house at 40 years old. But at 10 years old, he wanted to. Why? So that's interesting. Well, of course, what happened was he did jump off the roof successfully. So then he climbed up and did it again, and he continued to climb and jump off the roof. We just tried to keep it a secret from his mother, who did not think little boys jumping off the roof was a particularly good idea, but it moved for him from want to into like to. And then, of course, he grew up and became a teenager who got into parkour. If you do not know what this is, moms, if you want a very spine-tingling experience, go watch parkour fail videos on YouTube, and you will see teenage boys hurling themselves off skyscrapers and landing on, well, I won't go into it, but nevertheless, he was challenging himself because he thought he could. And this is true in school as well, in academics. If you think you can do something, then you want to. If you're successful, then you start to like that thing. Now, the third law, and the one that we have to be careful of as parents, is this. Children hate and will refuse to do that which they believe they cannot do. Children hate and will refuse to do that which they believe they cannot do. If a child hates something, it's almost always because he has had a momentum of failure, or she just does not believe that she can be successful. Therefore, that child will say, no, I will not do that. I, for example, flat out refuse ever again for any reason to get on a snowboard. You can't pay me enough. There is nothing except maybe a very, very large 5-digit number tax-free that would entice me to get on a snowboard ever again. Why? Because the last time I did it was so frustrating, so miserable, so embarrassing, so painful, so cold and irritating and everlastingly, interminably long. I simply won't do it again, and you can't force me. But here's what's fascinating. My children, they didn't understand this. They would say stupid things to me like, come on, Dad, come to the snow with us. You know, if you just practice a little bit, once you get the hang of it, it's fun. We're sure you could do this if you would just try. And of course, my attitude is no. You go to the snow with your mother and board and ski or whatever, and I will go fly somewhere and teach a seminar and try to pay for your stupid trip. That's my attitude. But think about it. How many times have we been on the other side of that, saying to a child, I think you could do this if you would just try. I know you would be able to do this if you would just try. There's nothing more useless you could say to a child. If they have decided that they cannot do it, that is not going to change their attitude. And then you resort to trying to force the thing or whatever. And here's something I've noticed in many cases. It's kind of sad, but true. In many cases, children will prefer punishment to failure. They would prefer to refuse to do something because they believe they'll fail and suffer whatever consequences you contrive than to do it and fail one more time. Now, the good news, most children are a lot more resilient than I am. One bad snowboard trip, I'm done for life. But everyone has a threshold, and every child with a certain amount of, momentum of not succeeding or feeling like they have not succeeded, they will reach a point where they'll say, no, I just won't do it anymore. So the application of these three laws is easy to say, hard to do, but the principle holds. If you could spend, say, 60 to 80% of your time having the child do what they can do and just make it easier and better and faster, whether that's playing an instrument or doing their Latin or, a physical activity or math. If you spend most of your time doing what you can do and get faster, easier, and better, then about 20 to 40% of your time having the students do what they believe they can do and helping them be successful and not withholding help. That's one of the 4 deadly errors of teaching writing that I talk about. We'll put a link if we can to that talk. But helping them be successful, and then they get the experience of that success, then they'll want to do that more. It'll move from want to into like to. And then 0% of your time asking a child to do something which he or she believes he cannot do, then you would have a 100% of the time perfectly motivated human being. I admit that is easy to say and hard to do, but it's okay to have ideals because that gives us something to work toward. So the 4 forms of relevancy: intrinsic, inspired, contrived, enforced, you want to avoid, and the 3 laws. Children like to do what they can do, want to do what they think they can do, and will refuse and hate to do what they believe they cannot do. Hopefully, you can apply some of that in your teaching of them at home and coaching them with greater joy and success. Thanks for spending your time with me. God bless you.